welcome to another episode of Contemplating Resonance. I'm your host, Matt Stine, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. This season, we have been focused on diving deep into stories of religious trauma, along with a few adjacent topics. And I forgot to set my do not disturb, and texts are flowing in as they should. So I'm going to go ahead and remember to do that now. And we may or may not delete that. I don't know. I like it. They say that when you leave a few mistakes in, it makes you more genuine. Yeah. So we'll go with that. But so as I was saying, we're diving into stories of religious trauma, looking at how it shaped the lives of our guests and the ways that they have found healing. And today I am joined by Christine Greenwald. She is a psychotherapist, a mom of 2 little kids, and a writer. She is the author of Recasting Religious Trauma, another Substack that you can add to your list that is growing and growing and growing. I declared bankruptcy myself. I think it was a week ago. I decided I needed to go clean out the ones that I was not actively reading because I couldn't find anything anymore because it's just, ooh, shiny. Anyway, I'm in a goofy mood today, clearly. Recasting Religious Trauma, where she explores issues related to religious trauma, evangelicalism, and mental health. So welcome to the show, Christine.
Thanks so much for having me.
I've been reading your Substack for, I don't know. I mean, I don't remember when I subscribed, but you've been around for a while. You've been around long enough that I feel like I know what I'm getting when you pop up in my inbox. Because almost everybody has a very distinct lane that they write within, whether they're aware of it or not. And so I enjoy your work.
Hopefully also like opening the emails and actually reading them. Thank you.
I am one of those people who actually does read. If I open it, I read it.
Yeah.
That I have finally learned in the last 6 months, and even I've been doing email since I was 13, 14 years old. I'm 40, almost 46, and I just learned how to delete emails without opening them. Like, not the function of doing it, but like the ability to take the pointer and click delete without actually even opening it and giving it a chance.
Yeah.
Like that was a long, hard-earned skill.
Mm-hmm. It hurts a little bit sometimes, but then you get used to it and you're like, it's okay.
It's true. It doesn't hurt at all now. I'm totally numb to it. I am a psychopath when it comes to email. No feelings whatsoever.
Gotta get to that place sometimes. Yeah.
So, nice segue into our topic, religious trauma. And that is your area of specialty, yes?
Yes, well, at least certainly for writing. I always sort of preface that I live in a small town, so sort of with doctors too, you have to be a generalist in everything, but
sure.
I love it when religious trauma clients seek me out, and we get to do some work on that. But I do see a lot of complex trauma patients as well, which I think we'll talk about later, and there can be a lot of overlap in how we work with those 2 issues.
Yeah, and that was one of my questions. Actually, was I saw complex trauma, and this is one of the things that I'm struggling with as I'm navigating this space is that there's a lot of jargon.
There
are lots of different subclassifications of trauma. Where, like, I was trauma, like that's where I'm at, and religious trauma, like, okay, I'm going to take but it's way more complicated than that. And that's what I'm both trying to learn and also kind of help people understand, is that, you dip your toe in the water a little bit through an Instagram post or something, you're getting a slice of the story, but there's a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about complex trauma and like what's trauma, what's complex trauma, what's religious trauma? How does that Venn diagram
explain trauma?
Yeah.
Yes.
As best you can.
as
in the
best I
time
can in a
allotted.
nutshell. Right. So the way some people will explain trauma is it's less about the incident that has happened to you and more about your body or your nervous system's response to it. So what might be considered traumatic for one person, it could be not at all for another person. It's really about your own individual ability to like process or digest whatever the thing is that happened to you. So something that felt bad, like really bad or scary or overwhelming, or like maybe gave you a feeling of powerlessness, like I can't actually escape from this, can all set up trauma responses then in your body. And of course, that will look different for everyone. So regular single incident trauma, kind of regular PTSD versus complex PTSD or complex trauma has a lot to do, not really the specific severity of what happened, but like the amount of times maybe that it happened or sort of the length of time that it happened. So single incident trauma to cause a sort of, I don't want to say normal, like a regular quote unquote PTSD response maybe would be a classic example of like a car accident. You get in a car accident, you know exactly the thing that happened, and that is the incident that you're going to be looking at and treating for trauma. But say you were abused over a long course of time in childhood, and there's never going to be like, oh, that one incident, that's the one that started it all. You're going to be working with a lot of different pieces and time periods, and also very complex ways that it manifests in your body, your nervous system, your like thinking patterns, all this stuff. So hence the complex nature of it all.
Okay. So like so we're actually dealing with, this is a fun crossover to my engineering world, like the actual technical meaning from the root words that form complex, like com is many, plex is a fold or a braid. So like sim means one. So simple actually comes from simplex, complex, one, many, right? So you're actually talking about, it could be just like a cluster of interrelated traumatic things, as opposed to, like the car accident one. That's silly. I was gonna say that's the only bad thing that happened. No, no, but that's
but it's a
like
very specific one.
That's the obvious, like everything else has been like normal, just life, but you've got this one event that your trauma response is anchored to. Whereas with complex, it's not clearly anchored to anything.
Yeah. And the complex, well, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's anchored to anything. Maybe it is, but it will also have a lot more impact on your general sense of self, or like the way that you see the world. Because if you didn't have much safety growing up, it's sort of then a generalized response to how you treat a lot of different situations now that you're an adult or older than you were. Whereas like a car accident, you're going to have a reaction when you're driving or something that feels really specific like that. So complex trauma is notoriously, of course, a lot trickier to treat because there are so many directions that you might be like trying to work in, and which one do you prioritize? And then people whose nervous systems have chronically been in this state of overwhelm, it's just going to be harder to reach internal safety to work on some of the issues without getting like overwhelmed or flooded or things like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, you're using a lot of phrasing that resonates with me, having personal experience with, a lot of these, like the constant state of overwhelm. I often say like a constant state of hypervigilance, as well. Like there were years of my life where, if I retrospect, it's like, I was never like not on the verge of like fight or flight. Like you're just below that simmering point where you're going to boil over. Right. I'll always tell, like, we're not designed to be there. For long periods of time, even if nothing's happening to you, just the fact that you're there.
Yeah, and you might not even know that you're there because you're just like, this is just how I live, which
yeah,
and then you have
totally.
to be like, oh, maybe not everyone or not everything has to feel this way.
Yeah,
Weird.
you start to find people who notice and like you're doing is like, wait, what's wrong with that? It's like, no, most people don't act like that all the time. You need to get help. Like I'm curious because I've been learning more about development of the brain and so forth, like complex trauma in young children versus complex trauma in adults.
Mm-hmm.
What how does that flavor the conversation?
Yeah. I mean, that would be a great and complicated question. So one of the
I'm making you play the game on hard mode. I'm sorry.
All right. I'm here for it. So I did a training like in a whatever psychotherapy system called NARM, which stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model, NAR. But it really centers a lot on developmental trauma, which is you're talking about like complex trauma that occurs in childhood. The different ways that kids, will maybe not have their needs met in whatever ways that happens. And it does get tricky because you don't really have direct memories of anything that happens generally before like the age of 4 or 5. So there's this sort of mystery of, well, it seems like my current reactions seem like something happened, but I don't know what it was unless someone told you. But like a lot of it is going on vibes, I guess, so to speak. But where you're like, okay, if my relationships all feel, messed up or whatever in this kind of way, or I'm seeing my life patterns and it feels super deeply rooted, a lot of times, like with clients and stuff, I will get pretty curious about maybe early childhood stuff, like especially with clients that are having what seem like pretty severe or large emotional reactions to things, like definitely outsized reactions to things, or where shame or like a really unstable sense of self, whatever it is that feels really intense, feels big and also kind of unexplained. That's when I really like to go back and look early. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. So I think I get it. Enough for this conversation.
Okay.
No, not like get it.
I got it. I can write a book on that now.
I mean, unfortunately, there are people who would probably say that, but I digress. Okay, so let's take the religious trauma puzzle piece now and bring it in. So I'm going to guess, based on what you're telling me, that religious trauma and complex trauma line up a lot.
I certainly think so. And I sort of stumbled into that realization myself. Like, side story is that in the last, 5 years, in the last like 10 or so years, I was writing little bits and pieces basically of a spiritual memoir, but really focused on it in the last 5 or so. And I wrote out the things that had happened to me, and it was more like reflecting back on it, realized that I was not just talking about my spiritual journey of deconstruction and, evangelicalism, all this stuff, but like I was speaking about a kind of trauma. Oh, this is religious trauma. Oh, this is not just like, a pastor abuses someone at a church. Again, like a very bad, but it's more of a single incident trauma. Like realizing that the religion I was raised in had gotten into my brain so much that it was changing the way that I saw myself. It had changed like how increased exponentially experiences of shame, all this different kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I may have lost your original question, but I came
going
to it organically.
You're going the right direction. You're going exactly the right direction. Like yeah, that was exactly what I was seeing in my mind as you were describing complex trauma. And then as I'm thinking back, well, almost everything that I can point to that impacts me, that was a religion, it was an or a pattern or a practice that was just drilled over again. And I even see it now in my one of these days I'm gonna get in trouble for talking about this stuff. But my kids that are still in school, they're not in college yet. They attend a Christian school that's a leftover from my pre-deconstruction days. But my ex-spouse she did not deconstruct. So I still, they talk to me about their chapel programs and things, and it's remarkable to me that they can have been in the environment they've been in as long as they've been in it and be as well adjusted as they seem. When it comes to how they view, I sat through the same purity culture, true love, weight stuff. I don't think it's called that anymore, but at the time, I was there for OG purity culture, right? Yeah. And it doesn't sound any different. It's at its core, and so it's the same thing. Like someone will be uncovered or forced out of the closet, or something happens, and there's like an emergency chapel service where we have to like spend an hour basically shaming everybody away from that particular sin, that they don't ever name that's why it happened, but it doesn't take very much thought to realize, oh, this person we now know of this particular stripe of the LGBTQ stuff. And then now there's like this big emphasis on that. And there's a purity contract that needs to be signed by the parents and the children.
Oh, like, man.
There's all kinds of stuff in. Yeah. And so like, yeah, it's all made from the same stuff, but it's like you're immersed in it. You're immersed in the trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're literally getting up every day and you're going to the trauma and hanging out with it for a few hours and then coming home. Whether that's, kids in a Christian school, or me when I was in my 20s as an evangelical, trying to be at the church every time the doors were opened, and listening to Christian radio back and forth to work, and reading only Christian books and watching only Christian approved you look back on it and you're like, wow, like you're like, wow, we don't call it brainwashing anymore. I was told we call it undue influence.
I did not know that.
I forgot who told me this. It may have been Jill. Jill's my wife. She's a public school teacher, so she has lots of the jargon as well. I don't know, but yeah, I look back on it and my immediate is I was brainwashed, and then I start, my neurodivergence takes me straight. Let's learn about brainwashing, and then you're like, oh yeah, they were doing all of this stuff.
Yeah, amazing how that lines up. But when you're in it, you just like fully trust that is the word and will of God, and that is how it should be.
You ask the fish, how's the water? And you're like, what's water?
What water? Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this is just how things are. Right? This is just the environment that we're working through. Well, on the topic of religious trauma, I decided to troll through your Substack and figure out, what all types of the top post at the time that I put this episode together was when God is an abusive parent. And you specifically get into the doctrine of hell and the traumatic aspects of that being the worldview that you're handed. And I remember being handed that worldview from as a very young child. So we're talking about, I guess, complex childhood trauma, plenty of situations.
Served up by religion. Yeah.
So yeah, what got you to write that one?
So when I first started, penning or typing or whatever, any kind of post or chapter related to that, I felt like I was very much saying the quiet part out loud. Like there weren't a whole lot of people naming that at the moment that I sort of started doing it. So I was kind of like, can I say that that it's actually really terrible if God exists, that God would do something like this. But I was like, someone should probably say that because it sure feels correct to me. But yeah, in that post, using hell as I guess the main example, and comparing God more to a parent, because that is natural in terms of like when you're growing up in the evangelical church, it's like Father God, Daddy God, like God is really
we were
thought
taught
of,
that explicitly.
right? Like, okay, well, we'll talk about him as a parent.
Yeah, you're supposed to think of God as your father. Okay, cool. Got
Yeah.
it. God is father. Now father's going to burn me.
Yeah, which is like, it's really not a far logical jump to be like, if God is like a parent, wait a second, what parent would send their kid to hell because they didn't believe the right things? Like, what is this? Really makes no sense. But also, nobody in Christianity is saying that. And so many people are still afraid of the consequences of not believing the right things, is that they just kind of stay stuck, or like even on their way deconstructing out the door, they're like, but what if I am wrong? This could be really bad news. But I wanted to kind of go with the theme of God being like a parent and then viewing it in a complex trauma way, because I don't think that many people outside of like enthusiastic evangelicalism, right? Like people who are not raised, I think how, or at least whenever you were practicing it, how you and I and all these other people were not getting how much of your life this takes up. They don't get that like God really does feel like a parent, and that complex trauma can actually happen because of this person, this entity who may or may not exist. God, the way that your mind is thinking about and believing in God. So if I believe wholeheartedly, sincerely that my parent is going to reject me in like the most violent and awful way, that is really scary to have to live with as your parent. Like if our real parents were like that, we'd be calling CPS, or like someone should be calling CPS and like removing us from the home.
I was wondering if you were going to go there.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, my first thought was like, okay, so if I walk up to my child and burn them,
yeah,
what's going to happen to me? I'm going to go to jail, because that's
you would be awful.
That's child abuse. Like it's not okay. But if it's God, it's fine.
Right.
If it's
a little bit of a double standard here, but the double standard, like, we lose, and we're the fallible ones. Why are we supposed to be more responsible than the supreme being?
He gets to do it because he's perfect. Okay, so the only perfect person gets to kill people, like carte blanche. Like
which explains a lot, I guess.
And then you have the evangelical gospel that, well, you ask Jesus in your heart, or whatever version of that you're using at the time, and you don't have to go to hell. Like you'll get to go to heaven. It's a non-choice.
Yeah. Oh, like let me freely choose to not.
I'm going to freely choose to reject you and send myself to this burning place. So you love me, but if I don't love you back, you're going to send me to the fire. Like,
you love me, but I have to love you because it's terrifying to not.
And what's terrifying about this is that, but also the fact that I walked through willingly years of my life believing that that was a rational, normal, okay, healthy thing to believe. Yeah.
We're brainwashed or undue influence. Yes, very undue influenced to think
I knocked on people's
okay.
doors for the purpose of telling them what we're now calling a source of complex trauma.
Yeah.
Like it I feel bad now. Like I've processed this, it's fine. But occasionally when I think about that time in my life through a different lens, which I just did, it's like a new
It is pretty wow. Sometimes I think about how patient like my friends or other outsiders would have been with me, this like super sincere, wholehearted high school or whatever, really believing that I had the only answer. They're like, okay, we'll be friends with you.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that the mental models that I held at that time, even if I try just for the purposes of examination, try to get those back into my head, I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's like the neural pathways that I needed to hold those ideas are gone.
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
No, I like that. Yeah. No, because if I were to try and squeeze myself back into that box, it really feels just like laughable.
It's like clothes that don't fit at all.
What? Like can't do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I to me, that just gives me more, not scientific proof, but intuitive proof that like I've literally reprogrammed myself.
Yeah.
Like physically reprogrammed myself, not consciously, but by, releasing ideas and bringing in new ideas. Like my brain is a different brain. My mind is a different mind. And then when I look back at, okay, let's look at what Matt Brain 15 years ago had in it. It's like, no, they're not compatible.
Yeah.
Which again, it's like, it is equally, I'm glad they're not compatible, but it's also terrifying that they ever were.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it really does feel like a different self in many ways. And I like maybe therapeutically, we want integration. We like that. And like younger Christine, she's invited in, but it feels so, so very removed from the way that I see anything now.
Yeah, it's interesting when I spend time with younger Matt, because I do. It's something that's one of the things that at least my current therapist and one of my coaches had me do. Was have conversations with the little kid, and it's weird. It's just weird. Like, anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to touch on that I just thought was interesting was you wrote on this symbiotic relationship between narcissism and evangelicalism. And, at face value, I chuckled, but then I read it and I was like, no, this is like a hardcore.
Did I convince you?
This is like the two things and I'm like, yeah, they have the same shape. But then you're kind of like taking me through this chicken and egg situation. It's like, and so I'll let you lay it out because it's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I got thinking about it, really, probably based on personal experience, and being like, why does there seem to be so much overlap with people who are narcissistic? And I don't necessarily mean like full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, but like more narcissism than maybe found in the general person or population. So that and evangelicalism, and it seemed like it is both, I want to say purposely cultivated in the church, because evangelicalism really needs you to believe that you special person, you special group of people are the only ones with the right answers for everybody. Like, only you, only your Bible, only your God, which has to have you like have very narrow lenses on, like not be able to actually like good faith engage with other people in terms of understanding their viewpoint, all that kind of stuff. Like a lot of overlap with a narcissistic viewpoint. I am the center of my universe, and maybe everyone else is too. I can only genuinely see my viewpoint. And what both of them also interplay a lot with is this idea of like emotional immaturity. So if I only ever know my viewpoint, I don't get a chance to grow very much emotionally. And also if I don't allow myself to have a really deeper understanding of who I am, like I think in evangelicalism, there's like, if you find any dirty laundry inside of yourself, like sins, quote, or things that you're ashamed of, like, you're not going to sit with it for long. You have to like give it over to God immediately, quickly. Right. You don't want to spend a lot of time like sitting with it, processing it, all that kind of stuff. Like all these things that could be really good growth opportunities. We don't do that.
Yeah, no shadow integration.
That's not very safe. No shadow integration. Yeah. None of that. And narcissists are also not very emotionally immature people. So like there is this commonality. So that would be, I don't know if we're talking about the chicken or the egg, but one of them. And then also I think that a lot of maybe pastors or people who become pastors have more narcissistic tendencies because of this, like, I get to be the star of the show and like I have the answers for everyone and everyone's going to be looking at me on the stage. I'm the cool hit pastor, like all the kind of stereotype.
Yeah. I mean,
there's a great, or like the mega pastor or whatever.
Do you watch if you watch the Righteous Gemstones on
No.
HBO on Max? Okay. So the Righteous Gemstones, basically the premise of the show is it follows a multi-generational, evangelical mega church pastor and his kids. They're adult kids. And then they're young. So it's 3 generations that are there character-wise. And all of the stuff that you're just talking about, like, that's kind of the tropes that they play up of, we're the super important, I'm more important than you. No, you're, and there's all this, they scrap like teenage children over who's the holiest and who's got the best ministry, and dad let me do the Easter sermon and all this. It's hilarious. It's tragically hilarious, but it's hilarious. Yeah. So yeah, there's 3 seasons. I think there's 3 seasons of it out there. And I recommend it to anyone who ever lived through, evangelical megachurch life.
Yeah.
At one point or another, and lived to tell about it. Right.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like you're everything that you were saying, it just, those images just immediately popped into my mind. And I remember, like, even it drifted down into, like, I was Southern Baptist, so Sunday school, but I don't know how many different names they came up with Sunday school over time to make it sound more hip and trendy, but they did. So I forget what it was actually called at the time, but there was like this hierarchy of like the adult minister and then the teachers underneath him. And there were like older teachers who were making sure the younger teachers weren't going off into weird places with, stick to the message. And the vast majority of the programming was geared toward training us to be perfect patriarchal marriage families that birthed all the babies and by golly, no women in the workplace. And I mean, it wasn't, you weren't forbidden, but like it was just,
weren't encouraged.
It was clear that the holy people don't do that.
Yeah.
And it was just Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. But like looking back on, especially like, cause I would guest teach from time to time. And like, yeah, it was this high pressure, like I would be more nervous teaching Sunday school than I would be like presenting to a meeting at work.
Yeah.
Because of that whole ethos of like, you don't want to make the church look bad. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want, you can't teach anymore because you, very
image oriented.
Even at one point when we were struggling with like the fact that our church was so far away and we were thinking about visiting another church, they're like, well, we're going to have to remove you from leadership because you're considering going to another church.
Oh, because you're thinking about it.
Because you're thinking about it. You're not committed. And again, so it's like you're, and so the experience of being othered while still technically not an other, like you're still a bit, but it's like, no, you've strayed too far.
Like being in a narcissistically abusive relationship, like where the abuser demands so much of your attention and your time and
we don't want you to leave, but you're going to be punished.
Yeah.
Yeah. So enough about the problem, because I could talk about the problem for hours, believe me.
It's so big.
I have a podcast just for this. How do you help? Well, I mean, how do you help yourself? Because you're obviously committed to this because you have experience with it.
Yeah.
But also like, so you've healed yourself, but you're also using that as an avenue to reach other people. So I'm curious, but tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I think that as a writer, I have done a lot of emotional processing through writing, as writers know. And I think I actually said this to my therapist, and she was like, oh, so you were doing, when you wrote your memoir, you were doing adaptive information processing, which is an EMDR term, another
Okay.
modality that I'm trained in. But where you're helping your brain have adaptive information and be like, here's some good stuff that we can stick in here, and we're going to organize it and we're going to understand it. Or like even the bad stuff, we're going to at least organize the bad stuff, stick in some new good stuff, and help everything make sense. And it honestly did feel like that for me through the process of writing, because I wrote it all. I wrote everything, every like nook and cranny and corner that I could think of that had felt problematic for my faith upbringing, and just made it make sense to myself. Like I metaphorically drew the lines from one thing to the other. I was like, oh, that's why I feel that way. That's why I'm having these reactions. And like the process itself was kind of yucky. I'd like have these days where I just was like in a foul mood and didn't know why. And then I was like, oh, but I was just thinking about that really hard topic. Okay, that makes sense. It's like, it won't always look pretty. It's not going to be easy necessarily. Not, well, ever. I don't know. Parts of it are fun. I think that it is also, once you can trust that like you're not going to burn in hell or like lose every community that you have ever known, or if you do, you lose your community, you will one day find something again. Like once you can kind of branch out a little bit, or I think for me, it was a lot of like, God's just going to be really mad at me for even questioning these things. Like I worried about God's emotional reaction to me. In this little like narcissistic way of thinking about things, because that's what we learn to do. But I digress. Once you can get to this place of trusting, yeah,
I'm hanging with you. Everything you're saying, I'm just like, yep.
Yeah. The journey really can be fun. Like I explored a lot of things, starting from this really fundamentalist side on the right, and then just like, trying out these different denominations, and then testing out things outside of Christianity once I got brave enough for like spiritualism, and like went to a thing where there were mediums and like people talking to dead spirit. Like I was trying everything. It was exciting. Like there's
Lovely.
so much to learn and so much to experience once you're outside your little bubble. I'm not saying everyone has to do that by any means, but almost, maybe if it feels okay to people, and you do require like a lot of internal spiritual safety to do this, but like sort of a choose your own adventure. Like it doesn't have to be bad or scary. And choose your own adventure could look like, I don't want any spirituality in my life either, and I'm going to go walk in the woods and never think about church or any formal spirituality again. Like, or not walk in the woods. I'm just going to drink my coffee on my porch. Whatever. Like, you still get to choose your own adventure, and that's the important part. So I'm still, like, I would say that I am pretty clear about what I believe, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, how it feels okay to practice. So this is like my personal journey, like practice where I'm currently rooted, like where there's not a lot of options in a small town that I live in. And while having two little kids, that like if I'm doing something on a Sunday morning, because their dad is a pastor, we are married, but I treat my religious trauma gently and don't make myself go to his church or like places where I don't, where stuff is going to get triggered. I'm like, you know what, Christine, you don't have to do that to yourself. So options are limited in terms of maybe what I can do now.
What's that like, by the way? And you don't have to answer if you don't, but like
the pastor part?
Yeah, being married to a pastor and being a person who has these conversations. Like I was immediately curious about that, because you wrote about it a couple times.
I have, because a lot of my writing is just like processing whatever is going on in my life at the time. And I would say a lot of the time I don't think about it too hard, probably as a coping mechanism, like don't want to think about it too hard. But I think of him as having a job. Like he has a job, I have a job, and we have a family together. Like just because he has a job doesn't mean that other people's notions of what I should be in relation to that job, i.e. a pastor's wife, that that doesn't mean that's what I should be. And I'm giving myself a lot of permission to not be that, or like to be that, quote, in the way that feels comfortable for me. And his church is like, I honestly have no idea, like, if any of them read my stuff or whatever. Like, I don't think they follow me super closely. They just know I don't really come at this point on Sundays. And no one has really given him pushback. And I respect that. Like, I do appreciate that about them. I don't know. Maybe they're talking behind my back, but they're not telling him. They're not telling me. So we're both good.
It sounds like a situation that is slightly too good to be true.
Maybe it is, but I don't know.
And I'm not saying that in a way. No, this is not actually happening, Christine. Here's what's actually. I'm not going to do that. But like the idea that people can be in an intimate relationship that's committed and doing all of the things that entails, when at an ideological values level, there are clearly some areas that are just not, they're just not compatible. And I think we should be able to be in community that way. But I also know that doesn't work for most people that I run into. Like, you end up having a schism because you're like, at some core level, this just doesn't work. And so I'm fascinated and glad and all of these things. But
I will say, like, if he were more like my upbringing, like his denomination of Disciples of Christ, which is like a very liberal, progressive, like justice-oriented congregation or denomination. Every congregation in rural areas almost is going to tend more conservative. But so if he were more evangelical, I honestly don't think this would work. But I picked him. I had fully deconstructed. I actually met him at seminary, a very liberal seminary, because I'm a spirituality junkie. And I was like, I want to get my therapist degree, an actual therapist degree, by the way, from a place where I can
part makes it a little less
theology.
too good to be true. That part makes it a little too
that makes it reality. Like, he's not. No,
I say that because like I am definitely not a Christian. Like, I'm so not a Christian, but I hang out with progressive Christian pastors because we like to talk about the same stuff, and we're not dogmatic about really anything. Like, I just don't have much dogma left in me.
I think it's much easier to connect that, like a progressive Jew and Christian and whoever, or like non-theist, anybody, whatever.
Yeah, I married a progressive Jew. It works out great.
Yeah, so much closer together than like progressive Christian and conservative Christian. Like, I feel like that
correct.
Is a
Absolutely.
bridge.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, I the choose your own adventure stuff really resonates with me. Yeah, because
you're choosing your own adventure.
I am, and like one of the phrases I use when I'm marketing my coaching business is setting up a spiritual practice on your own terms. Like, because I remember, like, everything was so very regimented, and depending on who you were sitting under, it could be like, if you're not reading, half the Bible every day, I'm exaggerating, like, you're a sinner. You have to pray for an hour. You have, and like, there's like,
and feel
this
guilty
whole
if
list
you don't.
of things that if you're not, and it's like, if I get up at 3:00 in the morning every day, I'll be able to do that, and then sleep through work, I guess. But anyway, like, I did not want to not have spirituality, because I tried that. I tried not being spiritual, and it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, okay, well, I want spirituality, but I got to figure out how to do it in a way that works for me. And what I figured out very quickly was that there's not a box that holds me well at all. Like, and I started out in a progressive Christian sort of container, and I still hang out with those, but not them quite a lot, but I don't really attend anymore because my mind's conversation is in a different place from like where they're at, what they're
Yeah.
talking about these days. And I mean, if anything, my closest approximation to Christianity these days is dabbling in hoodoo. Because I started trying to learn about, what is the folk religion of the space that I live within right now. So
Okay.
I'm near Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh, that's where
I'm
my
in the
friends are.
Mississippi River Delta. This is where, my state, Mississippi, most dense slave population in the entire South. Generations of those families are still here. And so they brought they brought with them in the slave ship their knowledge of spiritual practices that they carried from Africa. And they basically, for survival purposes, integrated them to the slaveholders' religion. And what pops out is, we're going to use, the Bible as a spell book. This is our folk magic practice. Whether it be encountered as hoodoo or Southern conjure or whatever, and so I've been learning this spirituality from some people that I've found. This is the other thing that I find is we're outside of evangelical Christianity. People are so much more willing to share with you as a teacher if you're willing to learn. If you're willing to learn, if you want to learn from somebody, people will teach you anything you want to know.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool seeing things like the Bible through completely different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, of course, I've geeked out on my fair share of comparative religious stuff, and there's nothing in the Bible that's original. I'm sorry, folks. It's all borrowed.
Don't tell.
It's all borrowed. Doesn't make it not meaningful or wrong but it is borrowed. It's not original. And
you could
because
think of it
for
as
me,
being timeless across cultures, but
for me that opens up this whole beautiful thing. You can go learn all of that stuff and understand how those things influenced one another and get different views on the same archetypal things. And it's just it's the thing that I was always told that I was supposed to be afraid of is the thing that I found to be the most beautiful.
Yes. I absolutely feel that way. Man, they were really talking down this thing, or like tarot that I've been getting into lately. That would have been satanic, or still is thought of as satanic if I were in the right circle. But this is amazing. I feel so much more in touch with myself. It's really enriching. It's not dangerous or scary or gonna drag me down the wrong path. I'm already on it. It's fine.
It's too late.
And I'm actually a lot nicer and a better person this way.
Yeah. I think about the happiest I ever was as an evangelical, and I wasn't nearly as happy as I am as an ex-evangelical.
Yeah.
Because so many things that I was just carrying around on my back all the time.
Yeah.
They're gone. They're not there anymore. They're not holding me down. It's I'm much less tired when I start the day because I'm not, carrying this big bag of guilt and shame around with me everywhere I go.
Yeah. It is a wild difference that makes.
Well, on the tarot topic, that was I think I've been reading you for a while, but then I said, you're going to start writing about tarot. I need to get you on the podcast.
I love that.
Because it's okay, this post has tarot, it has Jungian psychology, and it has intuition and religious trauma all wrapped up in one box. So I dove in and I loved it. So say more about tarot. How'd you get into it? How does it, you said it's making you feel like you're more in touch with yourself. So and I have the same experience. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah. So even after over a decade of being fully out of evangelicalism, I still felt a little leery getting into tarot. There's just some steps we haven't crossed yet, but there were a couple other writers who have Substacks either specifically about tarot or like would regularly reference tarot and were or are Christians, that it started to feel a little safer. I started to get kind of curious, and then like bought a book, bought a deck of cards. It's like, am I ready to start this? Like, what if I pull the wrong card? What if I don't know how to do it? Whatever.
Yeah.
But then once I like gave myself permission to just try, it has ended up not like I'm far from an expert or anything. This is just the last several months. It has been a really wonderful experience. And I think what feels like most valuable is that intuition was almost explicitly forbidden or like looked down on, like, whatever. You were not supposed to be trusting yourself if it was an emotion that came from you, if it was an original thought from you, if it was like your desire, you wanted to do something, it was probably automatically the wrong thing, or like you shouldn't trust that. Growing up in evangelicalism. And while I don't like consciously believe that anymore, and obviously as a therapist, I have spent a lot of time working through emotions, others in my own, but like to have a practice that helps me so directly try and get in touch with my intuition has been very, very helpful. And my brain has really liked having something physical, like tangible, that I can hold instead of just like, okay, unscripted, like just think some thoughts or like do some meditation about whatever. Like, I like that I can hold it, I can see it, I can look up some meanings, and then I can sort of riff off of what I am thinking and feeling. Like, it's a little bit more guided. It has also been interesting to like flip at, so I have this little journal, I write down, the card and whatever's happening kind of related to it.
Yep.
And it's been really cool to go back and look through it and be like, oh, like here's some kind of wisdom or intuition maybe that has been guiding me along, or, more, hindsight is 2020, whatever kind of thing. But yeah, how I have been at least learning about tarot, or, the book that I've been reading, is it's not telling you the future, like it is telling you what is right now. Like, if what is going on currently were to continue to unfold in that way, it's sort of future telling, because it's getting to your deepest sort of knowing.
Right.
And I talked in the post, and I think this is what you like, but like the Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious, like your unconscious, and then the collective unconscious. So I don't know if I'm just making this part up, but this is sort of how I make sense of it. Maybe you can tell me if that feels true. But like tarot, like you don't know what the other side of the card is when you're holding it face down. But like, say that I am tapping into this collective unconscious, this like sort of way of knowing more than just our five senses can tell us. Like, there is just a lot of undercurrents of knowledge and being and knowing that we can dip our toes into a little bit. So sort of trusting that something like that is going on when I'm using the tarot deck and the tarot cards. And like, I sort of have, I guess, grown my trust that the right card will show up. I don't have to be afraid of like, what if I get a really bad or scary one? Like, it's just information. It is just a card, and something in me trusts that the right one's going to show up. And so far, like almost all of them have made sense in some kind of way. There's not been one where I'm like, oh my gosh, what? That's like the weirdest thing I ever saw. That makes absolutely no sense. It's often like, oh, that feels really clarifying. Or that makes me think about something. Or like, oh, I was having an off day, but if I shift my perspective this kind of way, that actually feels a lot better. I find it like very practical too.
Yeah.
And that it comes from me. Tool. It's not like some outside answer. It feels like it's coming from me.
It's a tool that you're using to access yourself.
Yeah.
I feel like. And now, whether you're accessing through that other consciousness, other spirits, other guides,
yeah.
I haven't fully formed those beliefs yet, but I do know that when I actually do really sit down, do a reading, I pull cards every day. Some days it's what I would consider an actual reading. Other days I'm just pulling cards to not break my streak. Because I've pulled cards every day since January the 8th of this year. And the cool thing about that is I have a spreadsheet that tracks all this. And so I can see, like, I know what my top 10 cards for the year are. I know what months I had more major arcana versus more wands
Ooh.
versus more.
This feels like such an engineering thing to do.
Totally. But what I didn't expect was to see really weird, interesting patterns.
Mm.
And what I want to do is go back at the end of the year and just kind of like walk through, like, okay, what was going on in my life here? What
Yeah.
was going on in my life here? Like, right now, my top card for I've drawn the Queen of Pentacles 12 times this year.
Interesting.
Okay, why? Like, what? Look at the times that I drew the Queen. What was going on? What's common about those times? How was I feel? Because I write all this stuff. I knew that if I just start the simple practice of writing a date, writing some cards that I pulled, writing whether it's 2 sentences or 2 pages of reflection that day, it's going to be enough that I can go back and, like, you know, there's the interrogating the cards each day, but then there's the going back retrospectively.
Yeah.
That I find, like, I find this with astrology too. Like, you learn so much more looking back on what happened when you know that this other thing was present, whether it's, you know, Pluto in this sign or you pulled these cards. Like, you're now getting this, like, history of your intuitive experience along with the mundane experience of just the stuff is like, I went to do this today. Like, I don't do that every day. But there are times where I'll, like, you know, this is going on right now and I don't know if it's connected to the cards or not, but I'm going to write it down so that later when I come back and look at this, I can reflect.
Yeah.
And all of that just from playing with a deck of cards every day.
Yeah.
Like that have a symbolic set of meanings that, well, multiple symbolic sets of meanings, really, depending on whose school of thought you're going with. And it doesn't really matter which one you pick, as long as it resonates with you, and then you're able to have those like conversations with yourself.
Yeah.
And, you know, but when you look at it, it's like, how does it work? It's like, it just kind of does.
Yeah.
It starts out feeling very awkward and you're learning just like any other skill. And eventually the words start to make a little sense and then the sentences start to make sense. And it's like you can kind of form. I remember the first time that cards popped out and I didn't have to go look up what they meant.
Yeah.
And so instead of worrying about what they meant, I started to think about, what does this mean to me now? Like, that pathway was freed up. And it's like, oh, this is cool. I want more of this. And so it kind of drove me back further. And I still don't even remotely feel like I understand the tarot.
I like how complex it is too. Yeah.
I think I could spend the rest of my life trying to understand the tarot. Which is cool because I'm also going to spend the rest of my life figuring out me. So it's good to know that the tool's not going to expire on me and become no longer useful. But yeah.
I like that it's simple enough to pick up pretty quickly, but complex enough to really keep you engaged and interested for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild. And the same card means something This is the other crazy thing, is like, I'll have a card come up and I'll look, and then I will go back and see the last time I pulled that card, totally different hit.
Yeah. You're really inspiring my practice. I want to I like this idea of retrospective and being like, what was the theme of the year? What was going on in this era of time?
Yeah. I got enough results from, like, the short term flipping back in my journal that it's like, I wonder, like, and so I'm just like, I'm keeping track of it. And, I have this belief that when I get a year's worth of this data, I mean, I've got 9 months of this data almost now. And I've got this graph that shows like, for example, when minor arcanas peak, no other suit ever peaks in my graph.
Yeah.
I have other suits. Like, I have a place where, like, wands and cups tied, and they had there was a place where the graphs met.
Uh-huh.
But anytime something like that's happening, my minor arcanas are low. But then, and so it's like I go through like this minor arcana phase, and then I go through one of the suites or two of the suites, and then I go through a minor arcana phase, and then I go through a different suite. And it's like, okay, I need to go back and understand what the heck was going on in my life during these lines, because I feel like if I understand that, I will understand the cards so much better, so that when I read them again, I'm going to get even more insight from it. And that just gets me like, oh, it's like this really cool feedback loop of learning, but it doesn't feel like toilsome learning. Like it's fun. It's a game.
It is fun. Yeah. It's a deck of cards. It feels like a game. It's cool to look at it and reflect about how it's working in your life. Yeah.
And so if someone were to say, okay, I'm trying to work through some religious trauma and I like tarot, like how would you explain that to them?
Well, first I would be impressed that they were brave enough already to be at this place of working with tarot. I mean, is your hypothetical person feeling anxious about that, or anxious about the religious trauma?
Let's just say that,
or like, we're good on everything. We just want like more depth, more insight.
Like for me, I feel like where my work intersects is that, you know, as a coach, as a tarot reader, like I'm not a trauma therapist. I don't need to. So you're on the other side of that. But now you're like, okay, I want to build a new spiritual practice. I'm curious about tarot, and yeah, of course, things are going to continue to come up with respect. You know, even though I'm not, you know, I'm well adjusted, at least as I can. You know, I've processed enough that, you know, that my religious trauma is no longer like
in your
debilitating to my experience, right? And so, I mean, that doesn't mean that you're not scared to death of tarot still. Like it depends. Like tarot is not, for me, it was an easy jump because I grew up with one side of my family that was very superstitious, and I got a Ouija board when I was 8 years old. Like but we all still went to church. Like there was some weird stuff there. So for me, like I was around Dungeons and Dragons and going to church on Sunday. And it was fine.
We had very different experiences.
It was fine. I didn't I didn't join the cult until I was an adult, right? And I got rid of some great Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I'm so pissed. And some great CDs. CDs, so quiet. Not that I need them anymore, but
right.
Know,
what's a CD?
right. I got one the other day. I funded a Kickstarter album, and I got a CD the other day that was autographed. You can't autograph a stream, so
that's true.
So it's kind of cool. But yeah, like so we're saying we still recognize there are things to work through, but we're okay, and we're curious about tarot. So how does that intersect?
Yeah. So, and basing off of like how I use it in my personal experience, it's kind of nice because you know how you used to, you're like, you always had to have your quiet time and stuff like that.
Right.
Like you had your time of meditating in the word, blah, blah, blah. And I like really chafe against the idea of doing that. But there is actually something really nice about having a grounding spiritual practice. You know, where there's a routine and there's like this time of self-reflection. And so, you know, with hypothetical client or whoever, maybe exploring if that was something that they might want to integrate into their life. Like what do they want their spiritual practice to look like? Or, you know, how do they maybe want to feel from doing their spiritual practice? And can tarot be integrated in a way that feels really good there? And I think trying to lower the scary barrier, like just play around with the idea. Like you don't have to feel like you're getting huge, you know, gigantic insights where your whole world will be changed. Like you're just playing with it. You're getting to know the deck. You're getting to know kind of how it might relate to you. I do that a lot with my clients to be like, just play with the idea. Like It feels big. It feels scary. Just don't hinge too much on it.
Right.
Start small. Go from there. If you end up really liking it, then great. If you're like, you know what? Don't think this is working out for me, then it's no big deal. Choose your own adventure. Choose a different adventure.
Right.
And probably talking like the goal is really to get to know yourself and, you know, where you want your life to go, or seeing barriers that maybe your conscious self couldn't see were in the way, but your subconscious or unconscious selves knew were going on, and you can kind of see that through the tarot. It's super great for that.
Yeah, like, I mean, for me, like, I can basically say that I replaced reading the Bible with the tarot. Like the tarot is my Bible.
Yeah, I was thinking that the other day.
And when you're talking about it as a tool to know yourself, like, we actually were in many ways forbidden from really knowing ourselves. We were told, oh, well, everybody is perfectly explained in the Bible. Like, all of your problems are because you're a fallen sinner. And if you weren't, if you were perfect, like Jesus, you wouldn't have any of these problems.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so the fact that you have problems
know.
means that you're doing something wrong. And so you never actually get to understand yourself.
Yeah. That's true.
So yeah, it's like, if you're trying to go back to having a spirituality and it's like, oh, well, what do you do? If all you ever knew was, oh, you're supposed to read your Bible and pray.
Yeah.
You didn't know there were all these other options out there. You didn't know, oh, tarot's not this crazy. I mean, it can be a fun, crazy fortune telling tool. I think it can, but it doesn't have, it's a deck of cards.
It doesn't have to be.
And they happen to have universal themes attached to them.
The archetypes. Yeah.
Right. And so you're going to relate to something in some deck somewhere if you just allow yourself to be okay with the fact that that's happening. And then it's just like, I mean, sometimes I'm pulling cards. Sometimes I'll just take the deck and flip through it until a card grabs me. And I'll just be like, you know, why is this card talking to me right now? And you start asking questions. And then you answer your own questions. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe I want to, and then you pull another card, or like, I'll pull a card from a tarot deck and from an oracle deck. That's really fun. Like, you'll see, you know, anytime you mix decks and seeing them actually start talking to each other, even though you know that they were designed by different people at different times and different places. I have multiple times paired up a tarot card from one deck and an oracle card, completely different system, from a different deck, and number of times there's like this, oh my gosh, this card goes perfectly with this card. Even though they theoretically shouldn't know anything about one another. And it's me that's making that connection, because there's something that resonates inside of me with that thing. Yeah. And that's what I think so powerful about it, is that, like, the cards are just kind of reaching into you and pulling out what wants to be seen and heard that you don't otherwise have access to.
Yes.
I mean, you can. Yeah. There are other techniques, obviously. There's plenty of ways to gain access. But
this is one of them.
It is an easy one to learn yourself and have access to, and not... It's like, oh, I want to do some self-exploration. Like, well, you got hours of fun awaiting you. Here's a deck.
Yeah. And I think, you know, depending where one is in their spiritual journey, like, someone could use the Bible for that same purpose. Like, it doesn't have to be God's literally written handbook for man about how to live your life. But, like, you could use it in a spiritual practice sort of way and let it speak to you. But I personally don't. Like, I have a hard time reading the Bible that way anymore because of my history. But, like, it's just a tool. All these things are just tools, and you're just choosing the one that resonates with you.
Yeah, totally. Like, I have done the whole bibliomancy thing plenty of times. Yeah. Not just with the Bible. I'll take so pick a book up, open it up, put your finger down. What does it land on? And more often than not, it speaks to something that's going on. And again, it's just that thing was already there.
Yeah.
This thing is just pulling it out for you.
Yeah. So I don't know if that makes someone feel a little more comfortable, like crossing over the bridge.
I hope
to
so.
trust out.
I hope so. Well, this has been an awesome conversation that I'm seeing has now gone on for an hour and a half. And which means I'm going to have some editing to do to make people listen to the whole thing. I mean, we started the recording early, but not that early.
Not that.
But I've had a blast talking about all this stuff with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, it really has been fun. Thank you for having me.
It's been my pleasure. I'm sure people are going to love this one. So on that note, I am going to, as I'm often made fun of saying, land the plane. And I just wanted to say to our listeners, thanks for hanging out with us and on this journey. I know that this season has a lot of challenging topics and a lot of emotionally charged things. So take care of yourself as you listen. If you enjoyed our conversation, there's a lot more out there on the Substack. You can also find us on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get podcasts. We show up, I think. And if you're looking to see when episodes drop, Instagram is contemplating .resonance. That was the name I was able to secure. So, yeah. Thanks again, Christine. Thanks, listeners. And until next time, stay resonant.